How does Cory Mills and Keith Self jumping out of a World War II era airplane marking the 80th anniversary of Normandy and baby wipes, how do they connect? Join our Fresh Freedom podcast and find out.
Welcome back to the Fresh Freedom Podcast. As you know, this is the podcast with the freedom-loving freshman members of the House of Representatives, where we provide you a behind-the-scenes look at what it's like to be a member of Congress. I'm joined by my fellow freshman conservative members of Congress, Josh Burkeen from Oklahoma and Keith Self from Texas. And our special guest today is a freshman freedom fighter, Cory Mills. Cory serves on the House Armed Services and the Foreign Affairs Committees. Before serving in Congress, he served our country in the United States Army as a member of the 82nd Airborne Division. He's known for literally going the distance and getting Americans out of dangerous situations. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But first, I want to hear all about the you just jumped out of an airplane, a perfectly good plane. You and Keith did.
Let's be careful with the perfectly good part. It is a military aircraft, and it was built in 1943. Keith and I had really a bucket list honor, a way to pay tribute to the greatest generation that's ever lived on the 80th anniversary of D-Day. And to be able to do that from this Placid Lassie was the name of the aircraft. 1943, it was utilized in both D-Day and on Operation Market Garden.
Wow.
And we were able to utilize that to jump over Mount Saint Michel. And let me just tell you, the conditions, and Keith and I were just talking about this, could not have been more perfect. I mean, our parachutes has about a 10-knot forward thrust. And when we came out of the aircraft, that came out already directly into the wind. It's got about a 6-knot wind. So, I mean, you're just sinking at a slow rate. The ground was soft. Your biggest, kind of hindrance, if you will, is the sheep running beneath you, so you had to avoid the sheep. That was kind of our greatest threat. But I mean, it was just such a great opportunity. One, jumping in our World War II helmets, uniform, boots, out of the actual World War II aircraft. And again, it was about paying respect and tribute to the greatest generation who understands what it was to fight for a constitution, fight for freedom, and also understood back then, unlike today with World War II, that we relied on our allies to take the fight to the enemy first. We didn't play interventionists. We didn't play the neocon, neo-lib game of trying to involve ourselves in every single war and aspect.
Right.
And that's what was great about that generation, that we held out.
Until they drew us in.
Correct.
And forced us to come in.
Different from now, where we automatically jump in and use the treasures of the American taxpayers to pay for things that we shouldn't be involved in.
So Keith, the 80th year anniversary of Normandy landing, but correct me if I'm wrong, but the 82nd, 101st was the two airborne divisions that came in. So they came in the middle of the night before D-Day happened at 6, 7 a.m. on the beaches.
Right.
5 different landing spots? 2 American,
beaches.
1, what were the 5? Sword, Juneau, Utah,
And
Omaha, but there's another one, wasn't there?
Gold.
You missed Gold.
Who was
British and other allies were on Sword, Gold, and Juneau. We took Utah, which is flat, and we took Omaha, which had the cliffs. Omaha was the hardest one because of the cliffs. Until they found that gap, they were stuck on the beach. Utah was much easier.
And then you also had the Rangers, who had to scale the cliffs and point to Hawk, while having MG-42s and grenades launched at them as they rappelled up, which was just, when you really see those cliffs and you think about what a harrowing act that was, it's nothing short of just the most heroic action I've ever heard of.
So did y'all reenact the jump of the 82nd and 101st? Did y'all go and wasn't there like a bridge towards Sword
No,
we
that you had to
didn't jump
secure?
on an original DZ.
Okay.
This was meant to jump near Mont Saint Michel because Saint Michael is known as the patron saint of paratroopers.
Okay.
So they chose this sheep field, as Cory said, for us to jump on, but it was not one of the original DZs.
Okay.
The original DZs were further inland because we were right on the coast. You wouldn't jump an airborne division.
It's the gliders. Wasn't there like a glider division that came in that secured the bridge?
That's part of the 82nd.
Yes.
Okay.
That's the glider regiment, 325.
Okay.
So they had their own landing zones inland, though,
Okay.
near St. Marigle's, for instance.
And which, by the way,
Very
I was
famous
part of the 325th, which is why if you look at 1st Brigade, 2nd Brigade, 3rd Brigade within the 82nd, the reason that 2nd Brigade is the only one that's known as an airborne infantry regiment as opposed to a parachute infantry regiment was because they were originally the glider infantry.
I mean, just gliders meaning that there was a plane that didn't have an engine that was drugged behind another engine plane, and then they cut loose the chute that night, and they were to glide in and secure an area. Why did they do the gliders? Was it to keep because when everybody got mixed?
Equipment as well.
Didn't have enough plane, and they carried the jeeps and things. See, we couldn't airdrop jeeps back then or howitzers.
Okay.
So they had to have a platform that would land them.
So those
So-
gliders, when they hit hard, those accounts of some of those hit hard.
They
It
hit
wasn't just
very
guys
hard,
that were hitting hard. It was equipment in there.
Correct.
Okay, I didn't realize that those.
Yeah.
Okay.
We can airdrop that equipment today. They couldn't do it in World War II.
And so one of those over there by where the Sword Beach was, they had to secure a bridge. It was one of the ways to keep the Germans from coming across and pushing back. So they were bringing jeeps in to just get them quicker to the bridges. Or?
No, well, yes, but the 82nd went across that bridge. That's the bridge that General Gavin said that you could walk from one end of the bridge to the other and never touch the wood on the bodies of 82nd Airborne Division troopers.
That's awful.
General Gavin said that.
Yep.
Wow. Now, this is not your first jump, Keith.
No,
Right.
it's not my first jump into Normandy, so I did it years ago.
And in 44.
You set
He
him
was
up
there,
for
that's why
that.
he
You
knows
set
so
him
much.
up for that.
Those cloth chutes must have been hell.
Now, you were during the Cold War era, correct? You were in the 70s. That's
Well,
when
that
you were.
jump was in the 90s.
Oh, but I mean, before I step on my tongue here, bail me out. It was the 70s when you were like doing a lot of your station overseas, correct?
70s, 80s, and 90s.
Okay, thank you. All
From
right.
77 overseas from 77 to 99.
Okay,
So, Cory, back to Cory.
Yes.
sorry.
So,
I'm liking just drilling down on Keith over here.
well, we love Keith.
I know, Keith's amazing.
He's
He's such
great
a patriot.
adding flavor to
Back
this.
to Cory.
Yeah. So, how would you say how would you compare your time serving in the military to serving in Congress?
Oh, well, at least when I served.
Be honest.
Well, when I served in the military, at least I knew that my team was all going to basically point their rifles and fight in the right direction. You know, what I found within Congress, everyone thinks that they know how bad Congress is until you go in and serve, and you don't realize what a broken institution that it truly is, which is, the D.C. corruption that has really taken over the swamp, as everyone says, the D.C. song and dance, status quo of we'll spend our way to prosperity while drowning the American citizens in debt. The idea, this interventionist mindset that we can thrust ourselves into wars and the behest of every single industrial military complex, whatever the case may be, you don't truly understand it until you get in there. And I would say that while there's some comparisons of understanding your oath to office, and I think many of us will agree that when you're in uniform and you swear your oath, that oath doesn't expire simply because you remove that uniform. The problem is you and I talked about walking across the street today, is that I would be willing to bet that only about 40% of all of Congress truly understand their 7 articles, 27 amendments, and what is their guardrails and their guidelines, and what
good.
they're supposed to uphold
It's
as
good.
people who are elected officials. We talked about two of the most egregious, in my opinion, the 16th and 17th Amendment, which the 17th was ratified in 1913 under Wilson. And if you think about the message that was being sent in 1913 that's carried over, you have the 16th Amendment, which is federal income tax, meaning that we're going to take the money away from the American people to the federal government. And number two, with 17th Amendment, popular, a lot of people don't know that our U.S. senators used to be elected by our state legislators. The idea was to keep a check and balance to guarantee and govern and protect our 10th Amendment, which is that anything that doesn't fall within our Constitution, as us as federally elected, falls to the individual states and the individual liberties. When we passed the 17th Amendment, and the selling tool by politicians, because they're not statesmen, was that why should politicians elect politicians? And when you hear that, it actually is a really good way to sell this. What they didn't realize is that they were selling out and disenfranchising our state legislators. And you saw immediate hockey stick-like trajectory of growth, of bureaus, of departments, of agencies, the very things that are being weaponized against the American people today, but also one of the primary reasons that we're so far in debt, because we're saddling American taxpayers, our children, our future generations, because we have to continue to feed and fund these types of bureaucrats that are unelected lawmakers,
Right.
as you're seeing. And so there's a very big, vast contrast, to get back on point, between the military, who truly swears an oath to protect and defend and to give our lives. And I don't think that you've got that same integrity, that same willingness, that same courage in Congress to be willing to fight and die to protect that Constitution. And I think that that's what we do every time that we take those difficult votes.
Yeah.
Cory,
Yes, sir.
you made an enemies list. And I think actually everyone at this table made it. So tell us about that, and what do you think about that?
Well, you know, I wear it as a badge of honor. You know,
And what list is it?
This list is essentially a list that is putting us as enemies of the state by Ukraine. And my understanding is it's an organization, and I'm still trying to get fact to this, so I want to go ahead and preface this. But my understanding is that this is an organization that is actually taking money from the federal government in order to create it. And the idea that I refuse to support funding to Ukraine, I would not continue to launch America into proxy wars that we have no business in. And I would caution everyone with the ideas that in 1947, when we created NATO, which everyone knows what NATO stands for, now America takes over. And when you think about what NATO was created for, it was to stop Soviet Union expansionism. And if it was such a great threat that the Russians were going to overrun Europe, right? Why is the EU, under David O'Sullivan, who's the EU sanctions chief, bragging about the 190 billion euro in frozen Russian assets, about 206 billion US, that they're making 3.5 billion in profit on, but yet they won't pay 2% of GDP when it comes to Italy, France, and Germany. Now,
Just before you lose
Please.
us in the audience, the 2% GDP you're referencing
is under the NATO agreement.
from 10 years ago, where they said we will get to a place to where 2% of our GDP, of our gross domestic product, will be spent on our own defense, so we can look like a bear who stands up on his hind legs. He looks bigger,
grizzly porcupine.
bigger, and when you spend that amount, people are less likely to invade you.
But
And
the
one
problem
other
is that was
point.
flawed to begin with, because it should have been an actual fixed amount that was agreed to, and it should have been told how it has to be done. Like, as an example, if Germany wants to send broken Leopard tanks over to Ukraine that don't even work, they write it off as a full valued asset, and that's actually going on.
Yes.
And so it's being manipulated. And not only that, but this is my point that I was going to make for all of us here. We are thousands and thousands of miles away from the threats of the Russians, who are dealing with in my opinion, a regional conflict between Ukraine and Russia that they should be dealing with. Not to mention that in 2014, we should have been leveraging things like the 94 Budapest Memorandum as an international treaty violation that Russia, Ukraine, the US, and Northern Ireland, UK signed as a nuclear non-proliferation agreement that recognizes the sovereign territories of Ukraine. That wasn't done. Why? Well, we've been sold a bag of magic beans that war is good for our economy. And if you go back to the days of the war bond, and if you go back to the days of Rosie the Riveter and how we carried ourselves, and the fact that we controlled our supply chain, our rare earth mineral mines, our raw materials, in some aspects that's true. So far from the truth when we start buying all our materials from China, who's partnering with these very countries who are trying to suck us in. My duty is to protect the American citizens. My duty is to secure our borders, which is the true threat to America. When you think about the hundreds who've crossed from terrorist organizations, when you think about the millions who are driving up uncompensated medical costs, that are driving up medical insurance, that are causing angel families like what we saw when it came to Lincoln Riley. This is my job, is to protect the American people, not serve Zelensky and the Ukrainian people. So I won't vote for a penny of American dollars to be put into these proxy wars when our threat is our increased debt and the fact that we are reliant on adversarial nations that we won't hold accountable. So I think it's a badge of honor, and I'm happy to be on it.
Just a couple of other points.
Yeah.
First of all, Germany is now the third largest economy in the world. Secondly, our GDP, the US GDP, is 25, 26 trillion. EU GDP is 20.
That's right.
Russia's 2.5.
That's right.
It's not even a fair fight between EU and Russia.
and
No.
Russia.
They don't even need us. We need to pivot to China and let Russia handle
And yet,
Ukraine.
if you have this kind of level of conversation, the criticism is, oh, you support Russia.
No, I support
Right.
America. You know, there's always this argument about, well, that means you're an isolationist. No, I'm not an isolationist. I'm not an interventionist. I'm a protectionist. Protecting the American homeland, protecting our constitutional rights, liberties, and freedoms, protecting American people from overreach of federal government, but also ensuring that we can prepare ourselves for the real challenge, which is the economic resource supply chain and non-kinetic influence operation that China's been launching against us for 25 plus years that we've ignored. I mean, when you look at the Belt and Road Initiative, the expansion of Eurasia, the domination of Africa and Oceania, that's China's role to try and cut off Western Hemisphere supply chain between the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, the Horn of Africa, and then now in our own Western Hemisphere, we've got them using economic coercion on Honduras and Panama. And why? Because they want to also control the Panama Canal to increase taxes, trade, tariffs, and etc. So they're essentially doing a realistic geopolitical sanctioning of us. And we're sitting here writing these documents saying, hey, by the way, this has no teeth, we're not going to enforce it, but gosh, it's strongly worded and it's really going to hit home. And oh, by the way, we can't defeat you in many ways, but we'll out-pronoun you when it comes to our military. Right. I mean, I'm sure that China and our enemies who are quaking in their boots over the he, him, she, her, they, them, that's the argument of the decade, right? No, it's not. And so I'm not going to get into this Ukraine debacle because we have bigger things that we need to be focused on as America.
So what do you, China wrote a manifesto. There's some leaders that were part of their military, I think it's decades ago, where they talked about taking America from within. Mm-hmm. You know much about that?
Khrushchev actually said that communism already exists, but it's going to work in so slowly that you don't realize when it takes hold.
Well, my understanding is there's some people from China, though, that were military brass that they've discovered that they also believe that part of the real attempt with China is to exploit our economic weakness, to exploit our philosophy, to see us implode. And so that's really what you're saying, is that's the greater threat, and I believe that.
To one follow-on question, if I may.
Yes.
The elections on the EU yesterday, last several days in Europe.
Yes.
You think people are waking up?
I think that it's more and more obvious when you look at Bukele in El Salvador, when you look at Milei in Argentina, when you look at Marine Le Pen, who has just taken, who's from the Conservative Party in France, who's taken one of the biggest parliamentary leads, when you see what's happening, and all of these people, by Italy as well, I want to go ahead and mention, all of these people, guess who they support? Donald J. Trump. And you know what they're looking at? They're looking at the America First movement, the conservative movement that's live, and the fact that we're awake, not woke. And that's what's happening, is you're starting to see everyone else now, they're surpassing us. They took what we were doing under President Trump between 2016 and 2020, and they're now taking it and they're running with it. And what has happened, when you look at Argentina, I just talked about the 17th Amendment and those bureaus and departments and agencies. He's slashed about 60% of them, and guess what? They're now starting to build their GDP to now be inverted to their national debt. They're now coming back.
You didn't even mention Hungary.
Hungary as well. Yes, I apologize, but yes, Hungary as well. Where now you got CPAC doing so many different events there because they see that this is one of the other locations that's thriving within. So I think that people have taken the Donald J. Trump America First conservative movement, and the unfortunate part is they've now taken the torch and run it past us, and we need to, more than ever in 2024, get President Trump back in the White House, get back on a constitutional America First conservative movement, and we have to now catch up with our allies to ensure that we're there to support them and support the American people.
This is a dramatic moment in the world, I think.
You're saying what happened with the EU yesterday?
No, the coming 6 months. In the military, we've got something called the tipping point. When sides are basically equal, it's the will to win, and that's what we have got to exhibit over the next year, because these people are starting to exhibit the will to win at the tipping point. The tipping point is where it can go either way, and I think in America it could go either way today. We've got to exhibit the will to win, to protect our U.S. citizens over the world, to make sure that we get back to exactly what Cory's talking about.
And this is such a key point. I've been mentioning this a lot. Democrats fight to win, and Republicans fight not to lose. And while those sound the same on the surface, they are very different.
Absolutely.
And we have to understand that the false precedences that they set, we can't take the moral ground. We have to be willing to go ahead and get bloody on this and say, you know what? You set the precedence of being able to utilize this. iron sharpens iron. We're going to not use it against you. And that's the thing. We have to stop playing cowardice. We have to stop playing defense and play offense. We have to save this republic.
To a gunfight.
You have to stop wanting to be liked above all else.
And we have to think about Article 4, Section 4 that sets out that we are a republic, a constitutional republic, not a democracy of mob rule. And in order to try and provide and protect that, you have to be willing to fight for it. And that's how we became America to begin with.
Keith, I think you're right. One of the questions I wanted to kind of ask you guys is that the next few months are going to be critical, and there's a lot of discussion. I think our friend Kevin Roberts at Heritage just wrote an op-ed that said that he would encourage us to just get things done and then get back to the district and stop any further recognition that this is that we're here to work with this administration who is trying to imprison his opponent.
Yeah.
I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
I think he's right, but take our votes this evening. They were on nanny state bills.
That's true.
Why? We are the Republican Party. Why are we voting for more government, more
Keith, you don't think that
more intervention?
Shouldn't be told when to flush.
you don't think that you should not be able to flush wipes in the toilet? That the federal government is supposed to tell you when you can do that?
That's exactly what the Constitution told the states to.
Exactly.
By the way, I will
viewers
make
that
it
are
very
watching-
clear, more government does not equal better governance.
That's right.
More government equals less freedom.
Correct.
Not
If-
original with
I always
me, but
remember
that's-
that if government feels that they have the right to allow you to do something, they can also deny you. And so we want the states and individual rights. We want 10th Amendment to be enforced, not what we're seeing now, which is constitutional.
So to the
breach.
point, so the viewers understand what you're referring to is that there was a bill, a bill that came to the floor today under suspension.
Under suspension.
Which means it's supposedly
Didn't go through
not
regular order.
controversial. It didn't go through regular, and there was no amendments allowed. The bill said that any product that is a baby wipe has to have a label on it that says do not flush, which is just, I mean, really, that like where in the Constitution does it say this is under the authority?
This is the authority of a state.
But yet we're spending and meanwhile we have, Donald Trump being sentenced, or getting ready to be sentenced to jail. Steve Bannon is getting ready to go to jail. You've got.
Look, did you see the board though? I mean, those of us that voted around this table know. I mean, did you all look at the final count? I mean, there were about 40, 50 of us. Maybe I may be embellishing that number.
Less.
That voted no.
That's right.
And the bulk of 435 members, both Democrats and Republicans, put their yes vote on that bill.
And I want
because we're
these
ignorant of the
things-
Constitution.
Correct.
All
I
these
also
things are
want to say something that
happening,
you
and
just
we're
said.
doing this.
I want to tie two things together. We were just talking about the EU. We were talking about El Salvador and Argentina and all the others. And you were talking about President Trump and Steve Bannon, who's being wrongfully prosecuted in lawfare at its best, weaponization of our Department of Injustice. But what Bukele just said during his presidential re-election is he said, in Argentina, we don't arrest our political oppositions, we arrest the gangs and the criminals. Now, think about that stark contrast, the fact of our catch and relief, soft on crime, no bail policies, the fact that we had to pass the DC crime bill as one of our very first bills here in Congress in the 118th. And now, you're literally, as we talked about, they've taken the torch and they're running with this America, first conservative agenda, what we need to get back to.
So I want you to talk about how that is in contrast on the narrative here, and I'm instructed by a list of questions to get to this one. So this ties in.
Thank you, John.
You're welcome. We've got a border invasion, and we are importing an ideology. This is in tandem with what you're talking about. We are importing an ideology that I believe the Democrats know is going to fundamentally change us generationally.
Yes.
It's going to add census votes. That every 10 years we have illegals are counted in that. We know that that's going to benefit urban areas.
Now we all just vote on the fact that has to be added into the census survey as for them to have to say that they are Americans. But previous to that, yes, you're correct. And
Well,
the Senate
there you
hasn't
go.
actually taken it yet. And I
And-
understand that. But yes, sorry to interrupt.
So I just want you to talk about you're talking about this outside. I don't want to use the word global because global's been so co-opted by the left. But there's these countries now around the world that are taking notice, and they are moving forward with more conservative ideology. We're taking notice, and then America is importing leftist ideology into our country. We're importing the left view that is going to, for generations, pay dividends. So I want you to speak to that.
Well, the problem is that the left, I'll just put it this way, It used to be Republicans versus Democrats or even conservatives versus socialists. We are truly at a point now where it is America versus anti-America, good versus evil. We have to accept that. But what I would say is that they're not only importing a socialist, Marxist, communist type of ideological alignment, but they're allowing the individuals from other nations who believe in that way already, that don't need to be indoctrinated, into our nation by the millions. And so if you think about this, is the replacement theory. You know, I look at it from the aspect of, you know, I've gone to Afghanistan and helped to rescue Americans. I've gone to Israel to rescue Americans. I've gone to Haiti to rescue Americans. And you ask yourself, why didn't the Biden administration try to get Americans
And you're
to
doing
bring
that
them
with
back?
your own resources as well.
Pooled resources and you know, our buddies who, you know, that's one of the things that I believe that courage is contagious. But I also have seen where you can shame this administration into doing things. When I go out and I'm burning up media, it's not because I care to get the attaboys or the kudos. I could care less about it. But what it is to bring highlight to the fact that our government is failing the American people and that he is willfully in violation of his oath to office.
Right.
You know, whether you look at it as the take care clause as it's known or
Yes.
otherwise. But the reality is that they're leaving our borders open intentionally.
Which, for those who don't know what you're talking about, it's in Article 2, Section 3, where the president says he shall take care that the laws are faithfully
Correct.
executed. Yep.
And which he is clearly not in between sniffing hair and eating ice cream. And so the problem that we truly have here is that this is the replacement theory. This is this ideological shift that you saw take hold, whether it was in our schools with CRT, critical race theory, whether it's in our corporations with the environmental, social governance and guidelines, whether it's in our military with the division, which I think is division, not diversity, equity, inclusion. The idea is to draw us into a way, and this is why it's so important, by the way. I want to harp on this. Down ballot votes are so important in these elections. Our justices, our school boards, our commissioners, our mayoral races. We need to stop ignoring these down ballot votes because the left has weaponized that and have utilized it against us while we focused on the top priorities. They were digging out underneath us, tunneling under us until we actually fell. And we've continued to fall for it since then. But, you know, our border is the number one critical issue. I personally, it's not about an if, but a when and how bad. When we talk about terrorist activities, when we talk about the hundreds who've come across, when we talk about the 148 nations who's come across our borders, we're not talking about women and children. We're talking about military-aged males from China, Russia, Ukraine, Yemen, Pakistan. These are not nations which are friendly to us, which I'm proud to say we're on probably the enemy list of many of those nations. But
24,000 from China just since October.
that we know of.
The number,
and by the way,
number is closer to 100.
And we have to stop looking
Total
at just
in
our
the
southern
Biden
borders, by the
administration
way.
time.
I want to point this out. Look, Trudeau, if you remember anything about his father and Reagan, then you know it was no different than under Trump and Trudeau himself, that they do not see ideologically the same. We're focusing on our southern borders a lot in our talks, but what we don't realize is the majority of those who are crossing our borders who actually on terrorist watches are coming from our northern border. And we have to be very cautious of the fact that countries like Germany, countries like Canada, were taking in a bulk of the refugees from Syria, from Afghanistan, from all of these other areas, and they're crossing into our actual nation and then setting up cells. And we have to be very cautious of this. And so it's not just our southern borders. It is America as a whole, north and south, that we have to protect and that we have to secure.
Well, Cory, thank you for being a courageous fighter, courageous member of Congress. You said courage is contagious. And I have to admit, you inspire me all the time. And I just want to say thank you for your
And
service.
likewise, I mean, we feed off each other's strengths.
And thank you for joining us on this episode of Fresh Freedom. If you like Fresh Freedom and you like the bold ideas, please show us some love, hit the like and subscribe button, and to share it with your friends. As you know, this is your ticket to liberty that's available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, X, and Rumble. Until next time, stay free. We'll catch you on the next episode of Fresh Freedom.